So my name is Jose Franco. I am the co-host, and he is Dillon Cain. This is his podcast, The Developmental Gap. Dillon, why should people listen to our podcast? Why should people care?
I think that this podcast is going to be different in that we're actively coaching around making meaningful conversation around baseball and we're actively walking the walk and kind of talking about what it is that we are experiencing in real time as coaches and keeping it honest. This is a podcast for players anywhere from the ages of 10 to 18 and in the travel baseball circuit or the high school baseball circuit or those who are on their way to play college baseball. This is also a podcast for parents who are trying to navigate the travel baseball circuit and stay present, amidst a season. Because in New York, we're already in baseball season. And this is also for coaches who may want to ask questions or share feedback about what they're experiencing and collaborate with you and I about what we're experiencing.
Why should people tune in and listen or care for what you have to say?
Look, this game is a beautiful game, and it's a game I've been fortunate enough to be around for most of my life, and being able to play in different places and travel different places because of the game. And I want to give back everything that I've learned and at the same time, keep the conversation open and collaborate. I think it comes to a point where players want to feel they have a place to grow. Coaches, parents, we're going to keep baseball at the heart of everything that we talk about.
Inviting people into the conversation, sort of behind the curtain look of the thought process. We do hitting at the the Brooklyn base the Brooklyn Baseball Foundry, and there we're in a space that is a lot of baseball. And I've coached high school and travel baseball for over 30 years. I just hope that through this show we can convey our love, but at the same time help parents, players with questions along those lines in our process. So now that you're here in New York, Dillon, what can you tell us about what you would be doing now versus what you would normally be doing in Texas?
Well, obviously with the weather, we can't be doing as much outdoor work. So now that I'm in New York and, knowing that I have family and friends who are well into their season in Texas and in Puerto Rico. Well, in Puerto Rico, they've been playing year round. I think that you have to have a routine that gears you up ready to play whenever the weather allows, but two, staying grounded in what is working and focusing on what is not working, right? And using whatever resources you have available, and I would be focusing on things that are going to allow me to have success when it's time to go full speed. In Texas, we would be evaluating what's working to start and what we can really focus on game to game, pitch to pitch, at bat to at bat, and fine tuning these things. Because in Puerto Rico, it would be it's a whole nother process there where we're playing games sometimes 8 to 12 games a week. So it's about finding specific moments to really look for in the game and what it's delivering. And when a moment finds you that it didn't go well, when that next moment finds you, it's being ready for that next moment and bringing that to your practice reps.
And what's your connection to Puerto Rico?
I went to high school in Puerto Rico at a baseball academy. I went there for 4 years and, I just learned a lot about, baseball, but even on a larger scale with working with players and coaches that were in the major leagues, mentors and strength conditioning coaches who exposed me to processes in the weight room in Texas. It was more so specific to types of seasoning in Puerto Rico and understanding when to tweak your program here and there, depending on the level of competition, or if we were going to go on a long run with games, we would dial back maybe some in the weight room, keeping it, again, synergetic to baseball movement and staying healthy for longevity, because we were mirroring a larger season. We would play anywhere from 85 to 130 games a semester. So that was a different process than even growing up in Texas and playing in a high school season in Texas. If you play all the way through June, you may play 30 games, 40 games. We were playing 50 games in, 4 months. So it was just a different mindset, and it allowed you to fail a lot. It allowed you to get a lot of reps and it allowed you to get comfortable with day to day moments. They were a little bit more difficult because they felt repetitive sometimes. And you get comfortable with that repetitiveness and it turning into progress. Whereas in New York and in Texas, I think that's normal because we want to win. That's why we play this game. But in Puerto Rico, the wins and losses were definitely something that we looked at the end of the year. But it was more so about your day-to-day process. And a lot of times if you didn't make adjustments quicker than your teammates, you didn't play. And that's something that I learned early on in high school, that for me to get on the field, I had to make adjustments. And even then, sometimes that wasn't enough. And that's my connection to Puerto Rico, and it exposed me to a completely different way of baseball in a good way. And coming from Texas, we played all over the island. We played different towns, different communities, and play in tournaments in Dallas, Texas. We would play in Florida. So a little bit of exposure there to the states. We played some teams from the Northeast a few times. Played a lot of teams from Texas whenever we come to Dallas. So yeah, it was all about collaboration, and that's kind of what this podcast is inspired to become, and why I wanted to get on board and have this conversation
Now,
with you.
let me ask you, would you admit that the food tasted better in Puerto Rico? It was seasoned.
I was 14 years old and I was homesick, very homesick. And I remember it took me a little while to get to get over some of the things I wasn't gonna get anymore that you would get in Texas. In Texas, we can eat and we eat a lot. The funniest thing was whenever we would eat before a game with the team we were gonna play. A family reunion, and they didn't know you and you didn't know them yet, but you were about to get to know each other. And then you were gonna compete against each other, and then it didn't stop there. And it was a community and it was beautiful.
Before I knew you, the AD that hired us both, is there any synergies in the acting piece with baseball as to what we're trying to do?
For sure. I think that acting and baseball, I was always on the field. And, when my time was up as a player, acting kind of caught back up to me. I did some plays as a kid and I was always the guy. I was a gamer. I like to play the game. I like to practice, but it really wasn't until I got to Puerto Rico to understand what practice was. So in the States, I like to keep things loose, and I was the guy that was imitating the movie that just dropped and taking the reps. But then I would, talk to my teammates about, hey, did you see this new film? They're like, no, I didn't. I was like, well, let me tell you about it. And then I go into the bit. So it's always kind of been something that even when I was on the field, I was always communicating. But even more so, I think the diamond was just my stage for a long time. It was just my way to get in front of an audience and perform. So they've always been synergetic. I think that the lessons I've learned from baseball, as far as like discipline, time management, taking care of my body, communication, have definitely um, become handy. They keep me creative. Keeps me creative to be in front of people, to talk about this beautiful language that we have, and through baseball. It keeps me, the creative bone, I guess you could say, continues to grow.
Okay, I get that. Now, this is a conversation we're always having. One of my biggest things, I'm constantly telling players to listen to their self-talk, and that comes from, I feel that there's this pendulum between external fear and internal fear. External fear sometimes could be coaches, outside forces. Internal fears are counterproductive inner dialogues. So can you speak to what would you tell a 12-year-old?
You're going to fail in this game more than you're going to succeed in this game if you play it a long time. And that's okay, because that's where the lessons are learned, both that are going to help you as an athlete, but help you as a teammate. They're going to help you as a person. But you can't say that in a way to a 12-year-old like that. I would even dial it back even more to help them understand that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fail, but you have to be aggressive and commit, right? Committing and understanding the situation that you're in. If you're doing all of those things, communicating with your teammates, and you're giving, your maximum effort, and then you fail, you should wear that. You should wear that and be okay with that, because the game will give you another opportunity, you know? And in practice, especially, that's when you want to encourage them to fail. That's where you want to make the mistakes. You want to make them at full speed in practice, because, the stakes aren't as high. There's no win and run on second base. Mom and dad, grandma, they're not in the stands. Maybe they're at practice, but they're not in the stands, using their free time to watch you play, or drove you upstate. So you get to get familiar with failing full speed in practice. That way, when it happens in the game, and it will happen, you can go to the next pitch, you can go to the next play, and you can still be a good teammate and look for an opportunity to pick your team up, or look for an opportunity that when your teammate picks you up when you fail, and then have that conversation of like, well, thanks for picking me up, high five, or whatever it is that your culture is with your team.
Now, since you've played in Puerto Rico, now you're in the East Coast, you're here up in Brooklyn. You also played in Texas and the different climates. What would you say to the players and also the parents as to preparation, how to get ahead of things?
Element of baseball movements, understanding why you're moving the way you're moving with intention to, develop your movement patterns that are going to set you up for success as you play however many innings, however many games over the summer, the spring. But as you continue to grow, catching growth spurts, you are rising and you start incorporating movement patterns into your routine. You start to understand how to listen to your body. And you said earlier, you are your best coach or your worst coach. And that even goes to understanding like where I'm at today. Am I 100% physically or am I not at 100% physically? And, if you play this game long enough, some days you feel 100%, some days you don't. Now, that's a different conversation from 10 to 12-year-olds because they have a lot of energy. Whereas as you get into your later teens, you're prepping for SAT, you have different course loads, times on game days or sometimes on the weekend. The body just isn't moving or feels like it can move at 100%. But as long as you have a process that can assist getting you there and you've been practicing it, I think that's a good place. Beginning to either create your own or asking the questions with people who can assist you, I think is a good place to start.
So one of the things that we want this platform to be, it's an ongoing conversation where we invite anyone in the tri-state area. It could be anywhere. As they pose questions. And one of the questions that I had from a parent that was asking me, how do you determine playing time and what should the rule be towards playing time?
It it goes back to your reps as at practice and understanding that if you're in a program that is built on longevity and long-term success outside of the game, practice is going to be the place where that playing time is earned. There are different game scenarios where you'll get playing time, or you have maybe a kid that plays multiple sports and can't be there because he's got other commitments. Those are different conversations. But when the player is there, are they putting in the work? Are they showing up? Are they being a good teammate? Are they moving the program forward, both in their reps practicing and are they communicating efficiently that's going to make the team around them not just better athletes, but better people?
So from my experience, three lanes, and within those lanes, there's a spectrum. First, there's the indifferent players. Then the middle lane would be the reactive lane where players do as they're told, and it's the equivalent to someone in a job that asks his boss, how do you think I'm doing? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like they'll only do the minimal amount. And then there's unicorns that are proactive. They get ahead of things. And for me as a coach, those are the kids that I feel that's the payment when you're doing this, because those are the kids you can learn from and they fuel you because they're unicorns, and it's just constructive behavior that is commendable. I find that, can you speak to the miscommunication?
Different scenarios where you're going to have a lineup or you're going to set your team how you best set your lineup depending on your coaching style. I think that, if you have X amount of pitchers and you're trying to win a baseball game, there's one way to go about it. Or if you're going to develop kids who, like you said, are unicorns, you may set your lineup based around giving those guys some opportunity, and you want to partner those that you may think that they are there with that other lane so they can, and a lot of times they'll discover it. I think that whenever you sway work, I have some players who are good at one thing but are working on another thing that the other player is good at. So they're always working with someone on something that is their weakness. That makes sense. And that can go as
Yeah.
far as like their practice routine. If there's a player who's interested or is in one lane but thinks that they have their routine and another person has theirs. You might just ask them to have a conversation about what it is that you do before you get ready to play. And then you kind of let the team communicate that organically. And I think that when it comes to the parents, it's patience. I think you have to lead with patience and having them understand that, there are situations that you can use in a baseball game to help them see this. I've done this in the past where in this lane, well, I give them the moment that baseball would, and it always isn't just the outcome because I'll let them stay in this situation for as long as baseball allows. And then that's the conversation, because baseball provided that for me, and it can be from a pitching standpoint where, this kid should get more reps. This kid should get more innings. This kid should be the starter. Well, you let them out there and you let them play. And when things get intense, you let them go. You let them play. They're playing. So as the coach, I step back and I let the kids play. And that is going to be a teaching moment. Now, I could try and take this kid out and win the baseball game, or I can let the baseball be the teacher and still I have a job to do. I'm not going to prolong it, but I let baseball tell me when it's time to make that call. Does that make sense?
100%.
And
I
it
find
it
that
can be in the infield, it can be in the outfield, it can be the jump from one size field to the next, and then just kind of understanding you don't want to highlight a specific moment and kind of single a kid out, but you can use things like, hey, this tool, because we're on this field now, needs to be this is in our programs around improvement. Because this is going to be not just better for the team, but this is going to help this player level up their.
and my high school teammate Pedro Bourbone's story, his narrative, is the first thing that pops into my mind. I think Pedro's story I think he's had other people try to convey his story, but it's never been from the perspective of someone that was there. It's similar to, there's a book called The Short and Tragic Life of Robert Peace. I think it became a movie, and it's written by the roommate of the protagonist, who they both attended Yale. A true story type format. Phenomenal book. The first time I met Pedro, I met him in the summer of 1980. My family went to the Dominican Republic. Pedro used to live in the neighborhood of Las Palmas in Dominican, and my godfather lived in the same neighborhood. I met Pedro hanging out down the block, and then he would come over to the house, and I met him that summer, and that was that, and I found out that his father, Pedro Bourbon, pitched for the Cincinnati Reds. He played on the big red machine. So that summer I met Pedro, son of a famous baseball player. But where the story gets interesting, 2 years later, now I'm in high school, and I'm finding out there's a pitcher that was on the JV that his name is Pedro Bourbon Jr. The Pedro Bourbon Jr. I knew was living in an affluent neighborhood in the Dominican Republic. Can't be the same Pedro. And so sure enough, to my surprise, it was Pedro that I met, and that's when the story began, because I saw Pedro in that setting. But now we're in the Bronx, and so in the Bronx is the Bronx, and it is what it is. There's community, but there's also hardship. So what had happened, Pedro's dad had gotten released. Instead of going back to DR, Pedro's dad had another family, to Pedro's surprise, in Texas. So instead of going back to Dominican Republic, his dad stays in Texas. So he is little 13, 14-year-old Pedro. And out of nowhere, he decides just to get up, and he leaves and he goes to the Bronx to stay with an uncle, his mother's brother. One of the things I tell my 12-year-olds, I always talk about, and the question I pose to them, when does a boy become a man? And the point that I try to make is that it's never a number, it's a choice. And a lot of it comes from me viewing this narrative of a 14-year-old becoming a man. I witnessed Pedro in high school. Pedro didn't have an immediate family. His uncle did the best he could, but his uncle was a little rigid. And his uncle said, I'll provide you my sofa, but if you're not home by 11, the door closes. There were times that Pedro would be hanging out and 11:05 came around. Sometimes he wouldn't have a place to stay. So one of the things that you can do is, if you're from the city, you just ride the train. You just got to be on the train. It's warmer than it is outside, but you just ride the train, and Pedro would do that. And then he would go straight to school. So you know how people talk about being homeless at times? If Pedro wasn't home by 11, he would be. Then I found there was this interesting dynamic because my high school coach would schedule games against schools like Horace Mann and certain prep schools. And these kids had a different experience, a different bringing up than I did. You know, I grew up in the Upper West Side, the Bronx. I went to DeWitt Clinton High School. And, you know, we just made do. Pedro grew up in privilege, but now he was one of us. So his perspective, and I appreciate it more now, his perspective was amazing because he was with us, but he was forced to be an adult. So he knew, and he would get upset at things that we weren't aware of, where if we were playing a privileged team, that they would look down on us. He was keen to that. I didn't know because I wasn't thinking about it. I didn't have that perspective, or I wasn't aware of that perspective. So I always say that my script would be capturing Pedro's life, because Pedro went from riches to rags to riches. Normally it's rags to riches, but it's from riches to rags to riches. And he did it. I think Tom Sawyer, the narrative of the kid that goes out on his own, Pedro did like a Tom Sawyer type thing. And from high school, Pedro pitched, and to his surprise, he was drafted like in the 35th round out of high school by the Milwaukee Brewers. Pedro went and played in junior college. And when Pedro finally did sign, it was for $500, and he gave the money to his wife, who was pregnant at the time. And kids today talk about having sponsorship, and kids in college with all these endorsements. A lot of this prima donnas that you see online talking about they're going D1, they're committing to this, and that. Pedro signed for $500, and he had to buy his own spikes, and he just went, and he went for it. So if I think there's a script there, and then if you meet Pedro's very, very colorful.
Yeah.
I think we're both on the same page. We had this conversation before along the lines of not coaching to a narrative, but coaching to the present moment and getting kids to buy into the present moment. A big conversation that we have with our kids when they first come on the teams, we have about conversation. Could you take us out going over how important resetting in baseball is? And
I think resetting in the game is the quicker, and this is from you can make the adjustment, and that doesn't always mean with my mechanics. That doesn't always mean, my approach to the fastball or the off speed pitch or what count I'm in. It's mentally. It's, am I even here with my teammates? Am I engaging? Am I communicating? If I'm on the field, I have to know the situation. If I'm off the field, am I being a good teammate? Am I watching the game? What am I looking for in the other team that I can pass along to the guys who are playing to help us out? I think it's number one thing is in between the ears and how quick you can make adjustments mentally. And so when things don't go the way that you want them to go, you're still available to this game. versus letting the game play you. So I think that that's crucial. I think that no one's going to master it, but if you can stay in the process of staying present moment to moment in this game, you're going to be able to be available to what this game can teach you. And that's while I'm playing or while we're playing, or like I talk about it all the time, the development, the things that this game can teach you after the game is over with, that you can carry on and into your everyday lives to have nothing to do with the actual game, but you'll learn.
My name is Jose Franco. I am Dillon Cain's co-host. You have Dillon coming in live. Let's get the final word, Dillon.
Look, let's have fun. This game's supposed to be fun. As we talk about it, that's what I want to do. I want to have fun. I want to have meaningful conversations, be honest with everything that we do, and let's talk about the game the right way and let's help as many people as we can.